everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to this week's Make Your Mark webinar. Today we're going to be talking about food waste, why this is such an important issue and the impact it's having on the planet. My name is Kendall. I'm the engagement manager at the Planet Mark, and we're joined today by three amazing guest speakers who are going to talk us through some of the key issues around food waste and what they've been doing to tackle it. So these amazing speakers are Matthew Byne, Director of Food at Fooditude, Daniel Truss, co-founder of Chef's Eye, there he is, and Georgie Cella, Business Development Manager at Olio. So they're just going to give a quick hello and a bit of an intro to themselves before we get stuck into the meat of the session. So Matthew, shall we start with you as you popped up first?
As Kendall said, my name's Matt Byne. I'm the Director of Food at Fooditude. 25 years experience in the industry. 13 of those years have been spent with Fooditude. We operate a delivered-in food model from our Salsa approved kitchen in South London. Our client base is predominantly made up of tech and media companies, which are all based in central London. We offer a daily changing hot and cold menu, and pre-COVID we were delivering with our own fleet of vans around 2,800 meals a day. So that just gives you an idea about what Fooditude do as a company.
Thanks.
Okay.
Perfect. Yep. Cool. And then Daniel, maybe you could introduce, and then Georgie.
Hi, so Daniel Truss, the Director at Chef's Eye Tech. So what we do is we have a system for monitoring and tracking food waste and helping people to obviously then reduce their waste by tracking it. I myself have a restaurant background, worked in the kitchen, front of house. And then we launched Chef's Eye about 4 years ago. We currently have an office in London and also in Dubai, which is where I'm at the moment. So what I'll do as well is I'll talk a bit about what I'm starting to see with patterns of food waste post-COVID. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Amazing. Thanks, Daniel. And then Georgie, I know that you might have some construction bits going on in the background.
Yeah, hopefully you can't hear that. But hi everyone, my name is Georgie. I'm Business Development Manager at Olio. So Olio is a sharing app which enables people to share food and other items with their neighbours. And I work specifically on the Food Waste Hero programme, which is how we're working with businesses to help them reduce their edible surplus through surplus food collections and redistribution. And I'll be talking a bit today about the issue of food waste more broadly and how as individuals and businesses we can tackle that.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone. And we are going to hear more from all of our speakers in a minute. I'm just going to, for the next few minutes, run over some housekeeping and agenda items. So if you can bear with me, you'll have joined on mute and with your video off. That's fine. No need to panic. That's all good. You'll see a number of icons across the bottom of your screen. If you want to say hello or make introductions, please do that in the chat. If you have any questions, there should be a Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. If you put all of your questions in there, you can upvote on other questions that you also want to know the answer to. So the most popular questions will get bumped to the top of the list, and we've got 15 minutes at the end of the session to go through those questions. So pop your questions in the Q&A box, upvote on other questions that you want to know the answer to, and we will come to those at the end and have some time talking through those with our speakers at the end of the session. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the session is going to look like, we're going to have some big picture framing from Georgie. So she's going to, as she's already mentioned, actually going to talk more to us about kind of why it's a problem, some of the headline figures associated with food waste, and talk to us about what we can do. And then we've got two case studies for you. So we're going to hear from Matt and then Daniel about the work they've been doing to tackle this issue before. As I mentioned, we've got that 15-minute Q&A at the end. And also just to mention and make everyone aware, I'm going to run a poll at the end of the session. And if people want to join a networking session straight after the webinar at when we finish, at 11, then I'll launch a poll. You can say if you want to join, and then if enough people are keen and want to join that networking session, I'll post a Zoom link in the chat and you can follow that to a networking meeting straight after the session. That's totally optional, open to anyone who wants to come. But as I said, if we have enough interest, we will launch that networking session after the webinar. So an opportunity to talk more and catch up with all our everyone else who's joined the webinar then. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to hand over to Georgie, who's going to talk us through some of those big picture issues we mentioned. So Georgie, over to you. Just let me know when you want me to move on with the slides. Thanks.
Thank you, Kendall. So yeah, as Kendall mentioned, I'm just going to be outlining the issue of food waste and why it's something that we all should be tackling, both as individuals and as food businesses if you work in the industry. So if you could go on to the first slide. Yeah, so this just highlights the issue of food waste. So it's no exaggeration to say that food waste is one of the largest problems facing humanity today. And that's because a third of all food is wasted globally. Or in other words, if for every 2 tons of food that's eaten, 1 ton of food is wasted. And if we look at the next slide, then this shows the negative environmental impact of that food waste. So food waste for a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. That's after China and the US. And this is because when food is sent to landfill, it produces methane, which is 84 times more potent than CO2. So it has really detrimental environmental effects. And if we go on to the next slide, then looking to the future, you can see that with an increasing population, food production needs to increase by over 50% to feed all 10 billion of us by 2050. So this really puts into perspective that the scale of food waste as it is currently is really just inconceivable if we're going to have this issue of feeding our population. And the next slide then just shows more on the bright side, what the positive impact is of enabling us to tackle food waste. So it's actually been measured, reducing food waste has been voted as the #1 solution to tackling the climate crisis. And this was measured by Project Drawdown, which is a really interesting project. I'd recommend you to have a look at their website, which there's a link on the bottom right corner of that slide too. They measured hundreds of different solutions, individual solutions that can be tackled to mitigate against the effects of climate change. And reducing food waste was voted as the #1 issue. Interestingly as well, you can see from this that the 3rd one is plant-rich diet, so something else which is food related. So it shows that the food industry is really going to play, or is playing, an integral role in ensuring the future safety of our planet. And if we go on to the next slide, yeah, just looking at where does food waste occur in the UK. So you might be surprised to hear that over 70% or 70% of food waste actually comes from UK households. I think we often think that it's the supermarkets which are the big culprits for producing food waste, but we can see here that actually us as individuals represent most of the problem, and only 30% is coming from retail, manufacturing and the hospitality and food service sector. It's worth noting that these stats are post-farm gate, so it doesn't include agricultural food waste because that's quite difficult to measure. And the next slide, please, shows that, yeah, we are then, if 70% of food comes from households, then we are then half the problem, but this also means that we are over half the solution. And it was out of this realization that Olio was born. So if you go on to the next slide, it shows how Olio are tackling both sources of food waste, so food waste that occurs both in the home and food waste that occurs in businesses. And the next slide just shows how we're doing that. So to tackle food waste at home, Olio developed the food sharing app. So it's really simple to use. Basically, it's an app where users can upload food which they're not going to eat onto the app and share it with their neighbours for free. And I would encourage everyone after this webinar as a challenge just to go through your cupboards and find 1 item of food which you're not going to eat and share it with your neighbours on the Olio app. And then the next slide just shows our impact to date that we've had with Olio. So we've got over 2.4 million food waste fighting users across the globe, and food has been shared successfully in 54 countries. And we've both rescued and shared over 6 million portions of food. So this is the equivalent of 5,621 tons of CO2 emissions saved and 974 million litres of water, which shows that reducing food waste, you can see from these environmental stats, really does go a long way in massively reducing your carbon footprint. And if we move on to the next slide, I didn't want to let the food industry off the hook as well, because commercial food waste is also a massive problem. So these are some stats from WRAP, which show that the UK's hospitality and food service sector throws away 1 million tonnes of food each year, which is the equivalent to 1.3 billion meals. And out of this, 75% of this food could have been eaten. So it's food which was essentially fit for consumption. So if we move on to the next slide, it might be helpful at this point just to outline what kind of different types of food waste we get. So on the left, we've got avoidable food waste. So this is that 75% of food. It's avoidable because it's food which is edible. So this might occur because if you're a food business, it might occur because of poor forecasting, oversized portions leading to plate waste in restaurants, or incorrect storage of food, meaning that food goes off quicker than it's supposed to, or unforeseen circumstances like a global pandemic happening. In the middle, we've got possibly avoidable food waste. This is possibly avoidable because it's technically edible, but isn't largely considered as edible. And so the way to tackle this is through menu development. So creating creative recipes which use up all types of ingredients. So you've got an example there of potato skins or potato peelings, which are edible and could be used in a menu. And then also education around what is edible and what isn't, to make sure that anything which is edible can be put on the plate. And then lastly, on the right, we've got unavoidable food waste. It's unavoidable because it's food which is inedible. And there we're looking at the best alternative option for disposing of that food which isn't landfill. So we know that we've got some creative things that you can do with coffee grinds, for example. And in the next slide, I go into a bit more detail around how businesses should be looking at managing their food waste. So here we've got the food waste hierarchy. So going from the top to the bottom, starting with prevention, the top half is considered prevention methods because this is all used for edible food. And it's prevention because if we're using these methods, then we're enabling food to be used for their original purpose, which is to be eaten. So it's not classed as waste when we're using the top half of this category. And the bottom half is all considered waste management, and really no edible food should be reaching this stage because then the food isn't retaining its full value. And obviously, as we're going further down the hierarchy, then the impact to the environment is more negative as we go further down. And so the option is least preferable, and also it's often more costly as well as we're going further down the hierarchy. And then in terms of where Olio fits into this, we fill the gap to redistribute food to the local communities where charities can't. And the way that we're doing that is through the Olio's Food Waste Hero Programme, as this slide shows. So what we do is train our app users, our regular users, to become food waste heroes. We train them on the safe storage and collection of food, and then we connect them with local businesses which have surplus food which needs to be redistributed. We currently have over 9,000 food waste heroes registered across the UK, so we can collect food waste heroes to businesses on a really local level. And then that food is redistributed to the local community via the Olio app. And then we're able to report back to the business on the social and environmental impacts of that collection. And you can see from the bottom some nice photos of the collections. We've collected food from everything from Selfridge's Food Hall to Chelsea Football Club to events venues. There's all types of food from all sorts of businesses that we rescued. And the next slide, please, just shows, if you're not already convinced, some of the hidden benefits of becoming a zero food waste business, other than just doing the right thing. So we've got at the bottom there, some of the kind of more commercially viable benefits include staff retention and recruitment. And this is because staff see throwing away food as a moral issue. And so anything which can engage staff in socially beneficial activities helps with staff retention. And then we also know now that particularly millennials are constantly looking at a company's social responsibility and prioritizing that when looking for jobs. And so becoming zero food waste can really help attract high talent as well from recruitment. And then at the bottom there, talking about future proofing. So at the moment, becoming zero food waste is considered as a nice to have for businesses. But if we're looking at what other countries are doing, so for example, in France, they've got a ban on edible food waste. So supermarkets cannot chuck away any food which is considered edible. And this kind of legislation hints that a stronger legislation is going to come into the UK, where food businesses will be forced to manage their food waste better. And so becoming zero food waste will actually there'll be stronger laws around it. And then lastly, on the right, we've got the environmental and social impact. So we know, as I've said, that there's a huge environmental benefit to becoming zero food waste, and obviously a social benefit as well, particularly if you're redistributing that food. And this is something which consumers are looking more towards businesses doing, particularly now in light of the pandemic. Consumers are expecting businesses to do more, both on the social and the environmental front. And so we're hoping that this behaviour change will enact businesses and drive that change as well in the industry. And then lastly, on the final slide, I just wanted to finish on a note of positivity, because often when we're looking at the problem, when we're looking at sustainability, and even just in a more segregated issue like the problem of food waste, it can often seem really overwhelming, like there's too much to manage and it's too big an issue to tackle. But the way that we view things at Olio is essentially, if everybody works on their own little part of the jigsaw puzzle, then we can all of those bits come together to essentially make the world, make the planet a better place. And so I wanted to finish on that note, and I think now I'm passing over to Matt, who's going to explain all of the great things that they're doing at Fooditude to manage their food waste.
Thank you, Georgie. So, at our last AGM, we made not only reducing our food waste, but all waste the main takeaway for all of our staff. My involvement in helping Fooditude trying to build a reduced waste culture is predominantly from a kitchen perspective, as I'm a chef. So just to set the scene for the company, we set up an internal business, a responsible business committee, which was separated into 3 pods: society, environmental, and sourcing. And this was set up with a view to making our staff the key decision makers and drivers for topics in those areas. And obviously reducing waste and food waste on the whole was one of those. So our delivered in food model pre-COVID was very much buffet and pop-up based, which of course by its very nature creates a certain level of food waste. We're constantly trying to reduce this with new and different processes, such as operating a number matrix for each section of the kitchen. And this was in line with client requests and using data from clients to monitor footfall around certain busy periods of the day. One of the biggest initiatives we ran at our client sites was internal food waste audits as well. So these were week-long trials to ascertain certain things like plate waste, customers' preferred menu choices, rice, salad leaves, dressings, just to name a few. And we also quickly realised that our portioning could be reduced, specifically the protein items such as fillets of fish and single portion meat items like chicken breasts. So we started to pre-portion these in the kitchen, sort of pare them down by half before cooking, which meant we were sending in less and the on-site wastage dropped dramatically. We also work closely with our suppliers, as most contract caterers do, and they help us try to, on certain waste aspects. The biggest being that all of our fruit and veg is picked from the market and delivered in plastic crates, which we provide. And this was to cut out the amount of cardboard that our veg supplier was actually using, which has worked well. We've been doing that for a number of years now. We also use waste not on occasions for surplus vegetables, and our veg supplier has been an integral part in making that happen, especially with delivery. It's been seamless. So we also swapped to using clear bags in the kitchen, which was a conscious decision and one that sent a real message to the team. So my development team and I are the same as any other self-respecting chefs when it comes to food waste, really. And we try to negate it with mindful decisions around our starting menus. So our menus, like I say, change daily. They offer both hot and cold options. So it is a tricky task to get it right 100% of the time, especially in a buffet style. But on the whole, our menu composition focuses on reducing waste where possible. So on occasions where we simply can't get away from the waste, we try to be clever with the byproducts. So we serve over, between 80 to 100 kilo of different and daily changing vegetables as a simple side accompaniment. And the biggest producer of waste out of those vegetables is the cauliflower. Excuse me. And we've developed our own cauliflower leaf kimchi, and we use that at our units as a condiment. We also infuse oils with herb stems and cheese rinds. We make all of our meringues out of aquafaba, and we dry all of our vegetable scraps, as many as we can, using dehydrators, turn those into powders to be used into soups and things like that. Broccoli stalks, again, vegetable stalks into pestos, pared down properly so we can use them in stir fries, and lots of different ways that we're trying to get around it. The more challenging part, to ensuring the sensible menu writing isn't undone, is ensuring that the chefs in the kitchen follow on the process with their preparation and cooking methodology. So coming back to the culture piece, when any new chef joins the Fooditude brigade, they are given a food training pack which covers a whole multitude of kitchen preparation rules, and also includes the proper way to handle and prepare certain foods to avoid spoilage and waste. And this training pack is a live document and is constantly used by the senior team to remind, either in a one-to-one setup or a group scenario, the importance of adhering to these kitchen rules. And it's also signed off by senior staff at certain review points so that we can hold people to account as and when needed. And the chefs also have dish specification sheets to work from, and this only doesn't come from a sort of QC angle, but it also helps with the accuracy of how much food they need to order. And so if we're looking at buffets versus packaged in this new era, like many contract caterers post-COVID, we've had to evolve our food offer away from that buffet style offering that I was talking about to a more packaged solution. For me personally, I'm quite excited about it because it gives us as chefs full control when it comes to portioning and controlling plate waste or box waste. We also made a conscious decision around this to use compostable over plastic for our new food range, which is called Fuel by Fooditude. And I can talk a little bit about that decision in a minute. So Kendall, could you go on to the next slide? All right. Thank you. So this slide just outlines some of the companies that we're collaborating with. So at Fooditude, we believe the only way to keep our reduced waste culture on track is to collaborate with pioneers in this field. So on this slide, like I say, I've highlighted some examples of how we have worked and will continue to work with some of these companies. The first being Olio. So Georgie's already given a good outline of what they do. We regularly use Olio at our client sites to repurpose and distribute perfectly good food to those who need it, which is exactly what it does. Over the lockdown period, we also had at our production facility a huge dry store with varying items coming near to their best before dates. So we used Olio in that instance to get as much food as we could out into the local community. Our relationship with FareShare really took off earlier in the year as well. Just after lockdown kicked in, we decided as a company that we wanted to help in some way. So we started to use our kitchen facility to produce meals for the vulnerable in the borough of Southwark, which is where we're positioned. So FareShare literally gave us access to a ton of food each Monday, which we had to go and collect. And it was close to its use by dates. And we transformed that food into ready meals for people to reheat. And we ended up preparing and cooking close to 37,000 meals, I think, by the time we decided to slow down. So that's quite an achievement for us. We also partnered with Food Cycle 2 years ago and now donate prepared meals as and when we can. So it's an amazing charity. By using our surplus stock and getting our chefs to be creative with it. We've even had chefs attend or voluntarily attend some cooking sessions to help give creative advice, which was fantastic. And personally, I did their first ever live cook along webinar way back in April, I think it was. I think they've done a successful series on from that, so that's been great as well. So just to talk a little bit about Vegware, they are our chosen provider for our disposables, for our new packaged food range, and the decision to partner with Vegware was accelerated really when we realised they work closely with Paper Round. So Paper Round collect the soiled Vegware containers, cutlery and cups, and then they'll transform them into quality compost in just 7 weeks. So that's great. We've been working with Lugis and their Orca machines for 18 months now, and have 2 large machines installed at the production facility. So these machines are like big mechanical rotating stomachs, essentially. So with the use of agitation by plastic beads and controlled dosage of enzyme and constant rotating, they break down most of our food matter and turn it into liquid that then piped away with our wastewater. And more importantly, none of it goes to landfill. So that's been good as well. The machines are fully auditable and offer a great insight on how much food waste is actually being generated. Also, the chefs have allocated Orca boxes on their prep benches, and this is another great way to visually see the chefs aren't wasting too much food needlessly. And finally, sort of future partnerships. Had a VC with a company called Rice Inc. Last week. And I think what they're trying to do is fantastic. Apparently 30% of rice is wasted in large scale production. And what this social enterprise startup with the backing of Bill Clinton is trying to do is to change the rice supply chain for the better. And they want to reduce that waste and to help the smaller rice producers in the world really just survive and thrive. So we'll be working with those hopefully within the next few months. And that's me done. So I'm just going to hand over to Daniel from Chef's Eye, who's going to talk a little bit about what these guys are up to.
Right, thanks, Matt. So Chef's Eye, just as a bit of background, so we kind of sit on the top of the food waste hierarchy that Georgie showed earlier. So it's about reducing waste on site. And the way we see it is we don't have to recycle the waste if we don't make it in the first place. So basically what Chef's Eye is, it's a smart meter for your waste. So there's a set of scales that sit in the kitchen. The chefs weigh everything that gets thrown away, it photographs it, then they put in what type of waste it is, where it's come from. And then there's an online dashboard where they can view all the information. So generally what we look to do is, as it says at the top there, is empowering chefs to waste less food. So it's giving the chefs the information, and then really it's really interesting listening to Matt, because that's the kind of thing we want the chefs to be doing. So we provide the information, show them what their waste is, and they can use that information to then look at different ways of reducing waste, using the food in different ways, looking at where the waste is coming from and how they can look to avoid it. So a bit of background on how we started. So my dad and myself started the company. We're both chefs by background. So I'd been working out in Australia in a restaurant. My dad had a restaurant in London. I moved back to London for a job that didn't materialise, and he asked me to come in and just kind of help him out for a bit because they're having problems with their food costs. So we started looking at the normal, issues when it comes to costs, like what you're buying, obviously staff costs, things like that as well. And then we suddenly realised how much food we were throwing away, so how much we were producing and then throwing away, because we were doing lots of takeaway salads and things like this, and we were really busy, but our food costs just weren't there. So it's only really when we started to kind of drill into it, we realised how much it was costing us to throw away food, and that's really how we got started with Chef's Eye. First of all, writing it down on a piece of paper, then looking around for more automated solutions. We found a couple of systems we worked with, but ultimately we decided to use our kind of kitchen background to develop this system. So we launched in the UK in 2016. Currently we work with a lot of the big contract caterers. They're our kind of main bread and butter, if you like, but we also work with hotels, restaurants. And then towards the end of 2018, we opened up an office in Dubai, which is where I am at the moment, because there's some quite interesting things going on here from a government level when it comes to food waste. So I've been out here kind of all throughout the lockdown. So it's a bit of a different situation here. We were locked down for about a month, but then we came out of it. So a lot of the patterns that we started to see out here, we're starting to see back in the UK now as things open up. So, sorry, Kendall, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So, generally in terms of food waste, there's kind of three main areas that we tend to find, and it's a pretty even split between the three. So it would be production waste, which is things like we've got here, so like spoilage, peelings and trimmings, kitchen errors, things going out of date, that kind of thing. Plate waste, which is obviously food coming off the plate, and then overproduction, which is, especially in the contract caterers, is food going on the buffet at the end of service, that food then being thrown away. So we see a pretty even split between the three, and we're interested in look at all three areas really, because the more information you got on your food, the more information you've got to reduce it down by. As Georgie mentioned earlier as well, there's a split between avoidable and unavoidable waste. So a lot of the time, the comments we get from chefs are that our waste is unavoidable because it's peelings, it's food that's going on the plates. But as you can see on the slide here, we take a picture of all the waste. So if it's trimmings and someone's cutting a carrot, for instance, and they're cutting 2 centimetres off the end of it, then that's not an avoidable waste. That's actually quite avoidable. So by using that kind of information, we can then educate chefs on knife skills or other things like that. Same thing with plate waste. If half your waste, for instance, is coming from plate waste, then that's obviously the area that we need to look at. And then you start looking at things like, is the customers happy with the food? Are the portion sizes okay? Is it seasonal? Is it the right food for that time of year? So there's lots of different bits of information we can do. And really, like I say, we provide this information to the chefs, and then it allows the chefs to be a bit more creative with what they do and look at ways of reducing the waste. So generally, what we're looking at is around a 20 to 50% reduction in waste. It's quite a broad spectrum. It really depends on where your starting line is. And then with that, we want about a 2 to 5% reduction on food costs is really what we're looking at. And there's two ways of looking at this, and our clients come from it from two different perspectives. So one is looking at it from a sustainability point of view. I think we've noticed more and more since we launched in 2016, there's much more of a push from the CSR teams and these big contract catering companies especially to be more sustainable with what they do. So using things such as vegware as well that was mentioned before, looking at redistributing the food, but ultimately for reducing the food in the first place. And then the next thing really is food cost. So especially out here, food costs are through the roof. So if we can help someone to reduce their food cost by 2% by, reducing a bit of what's being produced, a bit that's going on the buffet, and then a bit that's going on the plate, then that's really what we're aiming to do. The highest waste reduction we've had is 90%, but to be honest, they didn't even need our system for that. All they had to do was look at how much food they were throwing in the bin. But generally between 20 to 50% really is what we're looking at. So sorry, Kendall, if you mind going to the next slide. So post-COVID, one of the biggest impacts we've seen here is the increase in disposable plastics being used, which is something I don't necessarily understand why people are doing it. It should be pretty safe to use the pot wash as usual. Lots of the sites here they've moved from a buffet service to putting things into pre-packed disposable boxes. We're seeing a massive increase in plastics. A lot of sites we're seeing are using polystyrene as well because they're cheaper, which is obviously a lot worse for the environment. But the other thing it's doing is increasing the food costs as well. So I think one site we have, that food costs have gone up by about 5% just because of they're using takeaway boxes and plastics. And it's a real shame, especially in the UK. The vast majority of our sites now are using single-use plastics. But I think because of the financial strains, this is starting to be pushed back up again. And then if we go, to the next slide. The next thing that we're seeing in line with this is what we're calling takeaway waste. So whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a contract catering site, a lot of food's being made, pre-portioned, and then food's just disappearing. So we're not really getting information of how much waste is coming back. It's only, I know some of the business and industry sites, for instance, we've got, they've got huge amounts of food waste going to different parts of the office. But this is becoming a real issue that we're starting to see. So next slide. So next slide, please. Another thing as well is people going back to what they were doing before. So even though customer levels are lower, just people still being in those habits of doing their mise en place every morning, doing the same amount of food, and we're seeing this is creating quite a lot more waste because obviously there's not so many people on site. And sorry, if we go to the final slide, please. And then obviously there's the cost volatility of food waste as well. So linked into this as well is the fact that people are starting to move more and more now to wanting to have locally sourced food. I think we're talking quite closely with the government here as well about it, because I think what this is highlighted is that you can't always rely on imports from different places. It's impacting on the cost of food. So I think we're starting to see a pattern now where people want to be more seasonal, more local with the food that they're making. And this should, further down the supply chain as well, this should lead to a reduction in food waste. Away from the end user, what we look at, more towards the agricultural level, the distributors as well. And that's it for me. So thank you very much. I'll pass you back to Kendall.
Dan, thank you so much. Thanks everyone, actually. Thanks Georgie, Matt, Dan, amazing. I'm really excited, and I know that to hear what you're going to talk about in the Q&A section, because I know we've had loads of questions come through. So if you are all able to join me again, sorry, I know on and off with the video, but we've had loads of questions come through. Thanks everyone who has put their questions in the Q&A. It's awesome. We've had some popular ones pop into the top. So I'm going to go through these. I'll try and direct them where I think to who I think would work best, but obviously please just jump in and answer away. So I'm going to crack on because we've got quite a few. So the first one from someone, an anonymous attendee, but how important is collaboration in the industry when reducing food waste? And this feels particularly relevant given how much crossover you guys have already talked about and what you're doing. So maybe we could start with Georgie on that. How important is collaboration in the industry when reducing food waste?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And I think what we've seen from looking at where food waste occurs, so with it occurring both like at a household level and then also in the food industry, both at the top end of production and then at the lower end, it's clear that collaboration really is the answer to reducing food waste, because it's at all of these levels that we need to tackle it. And I think there is more room for collaboration where, obviously at Olio, we're sitting at both ends of tackling food waste at home and in the food industry. And there's also, a great organisation like WRAP, which do both in-home campaigns to reduce food waste and also campaigns with their Guardians of the Grub, campaigns with for the food industry. And it's more campaigns like that we need to see. And it's that kind of collaboration which really fosters, which really will provide the solution, because also it's with food businesses, they've got a responsibility to reduce their own food waste, but then they can also be educating to consumers about what they're doing through kind of communicating their carbon reduction efforts and things like that. So it's this collaboration which I think really will drive action.
Amazing, thank you. And I know Matt and Dan, you've also both spoken about collaboration and all those different elements that go into reducing food waste. Did either of you want to jump in on that question?
I was just, sorry, Matt.
No, I'm just going to say, I mean, from an operational point of view, we are, a cog in the wheel. So to reach out to other companies and pull in all their knowledge and what they've got to offer, like I said in my piece about collaboration and pioneers in the field, you need that. You need to surround yourself with that armory to be able to go and tackle food waste on all fronts. I think you can do your little bit here, but if you've got collaboration with everybody or as many people as you can, you'll have a larger impact, I think.
I think as well, it's as was mentioned, it's education as well. It's raising the awareness. I think the more people you've got, having the same fund, the better, really, because So when we started doing this a few years ago, people didn't even know what food waste was. So the more people are talking about it, the more people are becoming aware. So that's what I think, yeah, it is important to have a collaboration.
Thanks, amazing. And so I'm going to try and jump around a bit to make sure that we're covering all of the broad topics that are coming through on these many questions. So we touched briefly actually on the plant-based meals, and this is a popular question put forward by Martin, and quite a few votes on this one. So do you see a shift to plant-based menus helping to reduce food waste? Matt and Dan, maybe if we come to you first.
Yeah, kind of interestingly, I don't know a lot about this. Someone was telling me they've moved to a more plant-based menu, and that their waste is actually going up. So I don't know if probably Matt, you've got a different experience in this, but I think really, I don't think it's necessarily what you're doing on the menu. Is making sure that you're giving the right food to the customers you have in that particular place. But that's just from my experience. But I'm sure Matt, you probably have a different story.
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, we always put the client's need first. So before making any radical changes on the menu, we'd always consult clients first. But we do run meatless Mondays bi-weekly. We run a lot of initiatives around, we make our own burgers. We replace sort of 30% of beef with mushrooms, and we add quinoa into our koftas and things like that. So there's lots of initiatives around making it more plant-based. And I'd say 30% of our menus now are probably vegan-based as well. So there's definitely a shift to that. But you do have to get the clients buying, because not everybody wants to be forced down that route. So with regards to how much food waste it creates, I think going back to that initial writing of the menu and being clever and having chefs that are mindful about what they're actually putting down on paper and how it translates, that's, you know, that can't be overlooked either. But I don't think we've seen an increase in food waste around what we're doing by putting more plant-based options on the menu, if I'm honest.
Thanks, Matt. And actually that menu development piece feeds into what Dan was saying about seasonal local produce as well, and thinking about how that feeds into those menus. Thank you. So we've actually had a question come in around legislation that's been pretty popular. So I'm gonna let anybody who wants to jump in on this one. But someone's asked, what can be done on a legislation level to help the reduction of food waste?
So I'll jump in on this just because it's kind of what we're doing at the moment out here. So the government have taken a real interest here in reducing food waste. So there's a couple of different projects we're working on. One of which is they're going to start bringing in fines, basically, for people whose waste goes up, and they're also going to be doing an accreditation similar to what the SRA do. And what we've seen with that is, because it's come from a government level, is because it's government legislation, it's forcing people to actually do something about it. I think it's, with anything, I think if someone's meant to do it, if that becomes the law, then it forces the issue through, really. And I think compared to, I mentioned France as well earlier, compared to a lot of other countries, the UK is kind of falling behind in this regard. I think food waste from, on a global level is something that needs to be reduced. So I think if the more the government could help with that, the better, I think.
Georgie or Matt, did you have anything to add on that, on Dan's points there?
Yeah, I would echo. I mean, I know I mentioned France as well. So they've been really key that in their government strategy of banning supermarkets from disposing of any edible food waste. And I'd really like to see a similar thing come into the UK, where edible food waste there's more reporting required from businesses on what they're throwing away, because that legislation really does drive change. And we've seen that France, I think, is one of the best countries in Europe in terms of food waste for businesses, their level of food waste. So it shows that legislation really can have action, and yeah, I'd like to see something similar happen in the UK. And I think from the government waste strategy that's being developed and work within RAP and the Quartile 2025 commitment, if anyone's aware of that, is all kind of pointing towards the idea that there might be some stronger legislation coming into the UK.
Amazing. Hopefully all positive. Thanks, Georgie. Amazing. Is there any way, this is another popular question, is there any way of disposing unavoidable food waste responsibly? So I suppose this comes back potentially to your food waste hierarchy, Georgie, but also other elements of the conversation we've had with Matt and Dan as well. So if the waste is unavoidable, how can we get rid of it responsibly?
Yeah, so very much is coming back to that hierarchy, and I think it's quite a useful image if that's how you kind of imagine it. And with unavoidable food waste, there definitely are options that aren't landfill. So you've got aerobic digestion and anaerobic digestion, which are actually two subtly different things, which are both options for not sending the food to landfill. So for example, you can turn the food into water, which then means that the important thing is that if it's not going to landfill, then the food isn't producing methane, which is the harmful gas which causes such detrimental effects. So yeah, you've got the anaerobic and aerobic digestion, and also composting for some foods. It's not an option for every single food, but for most inedible foods, there is an option which isn't landfill.
Thank you. And actually this feeds really nicely into the next question, which is around, and I think you briefly touched on this actually, Georgie, with the turning it into liquid waste. So question for Matthew, not sure if I missed this part of the conversation, but my question is about the food waste that is turned into liquid with, was it UGIS? Sorry if I said that wrong. Does this liquid then need to be separated out at the water treatment facility? What is the environmental impact of this? Could the liquid food waste be turned into something like fertilizer? So lots of questions in one there, but broadly on the same issue.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, we've had it then installed for the last 18 months, and it's turned around our sort of what we do with our food waste with regards to unavoidable. As far as I'm aware, it literally turns it into water, and then it gets disposed of the same way as our wastewater would. So it would go through the treatment works and then follow that process. To give you an idea about how much it sort of turns around, it can hold up 25 kilo of food every hour. It can turn around, not that we're generating that much, but the idea is that you don't overload the machines. They need to be fed correctly. So there's a whole training program around that as well. But they have been effective, and like I said, they're auditable as well. So we get a report monthly from UGIS to see how much we're actually wasting. And I think at the last count, we've reduced our food waste by about 25%. So, you know, going on what was being put in the machine, that is. So yeah, it's definitely played a part over the last 18 months to raise awareness, and it's always there so the chefs can see it. It's not, you know, it's on full view. So it's definitely worked and played a part.
Awesome. And maybe that could even be a question for them from you around whether it could be used as something like fertilizer. So thank you so much whoever posted that question. Really great. And actually you mentioned training as well then, and certification. So John Ranford has asked a question around training or certifications that you could recommend. So maybe, I don't know, Dan, do you have any anything you would recommend on that, or if not, everybody feel free to jump in on that one.
So, well, when it comes to training, there's not any certification I know about particularly for this. I mean, I think it's raising that awareness in the first place and letting the chefs know kind of what waste is and where it's coming from. I think as well, when like with what we do, there's a cost associated to it. I think so we're trying to work actually quite closely with catering colleges to get young chefs to understand actually, you know, the cost of the impact of food waste. And I think that kind of education side of it is something that's probably been missing in the industry. I think it's something that was there. I think if you talk to chefs who are, you know, a generation older than me, then they were made aware of, you know, of the impact of food waste, about, you know, of using every single part of the food. I think that's something that's probably gone away, and training to different chefs colleges as well, cooking colleges. That's something that's not really addressed now. So I think in terms of training, that's probably the best place to start. Then the next step would be to you know, to be aware of what you're doing. So if you're, every time you're cutting a cucumber and you're chucking 2 inches of it away, you know, like Matt said, he's got the plastic bins. That's a really good way to start, you know, see-through plastic bins, so the chef can actually see what's in there. And it's just getting that awareness in the first place.
Yeah, and I know that if I ever speak to my parents about food waste or anything like that, specifically meat, they would always say, you know, they would always eat nose to tail. There wouldn't be an undesirable part of the animal. It wouldn't be something that didn't get eaten. Everything would have a purpose and would turn into food at some stage.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for a chef in London, famous French chef, and he literally didn't waste anything. So he was always in the kitchen 3 hours before everyone else. And you come in, if he was doing butchery, he would use every single part of the food that come in. And he'd get the food in whole and reuse it. But for us as younger chefs, it's something we hadn't actually really seen before. You know, it's something, and especially, you know, a lot of our people we work with are contract caterers. I think that skill set is going out. So I think raising the awareness and training the chefs is probably the most important thing from my point of view.
Amazing, thank you.
I would say as well, just to add on that, because I mentioned before WRAP, so I don't know if anyone's aware of them, but they're really great charity that work on tackling food waste. They've got a Guardians of Grub campaign, which is really accessible if you check it out on their website. They have all types of businesses, so contract caterers, kind of small food businesses, all types which are involved in that, and it's essentially a program to which food businesses can follow, and it's a kind of step-by-step what you can do to reduce food waste, and it's really accessible. Also the SRA, the Sustainable Restaurant Association, is really good if you're maybe a slightly larger business to join. They have lots of tools and resources, and it's a great network for sustainable businesses, and I know Fooditude are part of that as well.
From my point of view, I mean, the training document that we put together was all around reducing food waste. So there's a lot of, you know, showing that chefs actually, you know, that everything can be used to a certain degree, and you know what's acceptable and what isn't. And then, like I said in my piece about holding people to account, and the senior level team needs to have that buy-in as well, and be pulling up the junior team to make sure that, you know, all of the things that we're trying to achieve as building a culture doesn't get undone. So yeah, the training side of it for me is the massive part. And like Daniel said, I think just making people aware and giving them some kind of knowledge base to know that what's acceptable and isn't is a good starting point. So
yeah, amazing. Thank you. And I think that's something we talk about all the time, is sustainability more broadly, is culture of change, getting buy-in at the right level, all those sorts of things that are really, really important for embedding long-term change within organisations. Also, I'm definitely going to download Guardians of Grub. I just wrote it down so I can go, and we can include a link to that maybe in our follow-up email as well. I think we've got time for one more question. So the last one from Farah, thank you for submitting, and any of the others that we haven't been able to answer, we will capture and answer for you in the follow-up email. But this is the last one with lots of votes on it. So how do different countries, and it's whether we know that, I don't know if we will know the answer to this one, but we'll have a go. How do different countries compare when examining how much food waste happens at household, commercial, and other levels?
Yeah, so I know it's broadly, it kind of follows, I guess, unsurprisingly, on a trend of countries which do worse on a household level are also doing worse at the commercial level. I know kind of per capita, Australia are the worst country for food waste per capita, so at a household level. And yeah, I'm not sure on a commercial level, but I think they're kind of high up on there as well. And it tends to be obviously developed countries which are at that higher end of the scale. And then in European countries are kind of doing slightly better in terms of commercial food waste, but the UK is lagging. And I mentioned that France is kind of leading on that in terms of, in Europe, they're one of the best for reducing their commercial food waste.
I can't remember the statistic now, but I think the developed nations, they throw away more than is produced in the developing countries. So I can't remember the exact statistic, but yeah, like Georgie said, is that kind of shift between, you know, the developed and developing world. But I don't think, in terms of household waste, I don't think there's that much information out there at the moment, which, and considering 70% of waste comes from there, probably needs to be looked at more closely.
Cool. Stick that one on the list as well then. Cool. All right, I'm sorry we haven't been able to get through all the questions. We've got only a few left, and we will make sure, as I mentioned, that we follow up with you in the follow-up email and get some answers on those 4 remaining questions. We'll capture those now. I think, thank you so much, Georgie, Matt, Dan. This is an issue that I really care about personally, so I think actually just have really enjoyed listening to you, all the knowledge that you've shared. I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us. I've just got a few final bits of information to share with everyone who's here. Matt, Georgie and Dan, it's up to you whether you want to stay on camera or hide away for these last few minutes, but thank you so much again. We certify, so at the Planet Mark, we certify hundreds of organisations who are committed to issues of sustainability. We know that food waste is one of these. If you want to get in touch or find out more, you can, well, I've included some information on this screen that you can use, so you can get in touch, look at the website, follow us on social media. As I mentioned, we will be sharing the slide deck, the recording and speaker contact details, and any answers to any unanswered questions in the follow-up email, so look out for that. I also mentioned at the beginning of the session that we were going to run an optional networking session at the end. So I'm just going to launch that poll now. And if you would like to vote, it should be launched. If you'd like to vote on that and let me know if you want to join or not, and if we've got enough people keen to attend, then we will go into that session now. Great, thank you. Oh, loads coming in, amazing. Okay. Hooray. Sorry, this is the awkward moment where you have to watch me count up all the responses. Okay, great. All right. So we've got majority of people saying, yes, you would really like to, but you can't this time, maybe next time. And we've got a handful saying, yes, count me in. So I'm going to share the link in the chat now. And if you'd like to join, I will go, I'll be there, and we can have a quick catch up now. And just a heads up for everyone next time, that there'll be the option to join networking after the session again. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, I've just posted the link there now, and I'll come along in a minute for those who would like to join. And all that remains to be said is a final massive thank you to all of our speakers today. I'm really grateful for their time in prepping, joining us, sharing all their knowledge. I know there's a lot of knowledge out there, and you tend to only scratch the surface in one of these, but very grateful, and many thanks to all of you. I'll leave these details on the screen so you can kind of track them down afterwards if you'd like, and we'll also share their contact details in the follow-up email. But for those of you who are joining the networking, I will see you in a minute, and thanks everyone for joining. See you soon.